wagon came down the last grade into the dry wood bottoms an hour before sundown, and the whole valley smelled of cut cane. Hester Mabry had been smelling it for 2 miles without saying so. It came up the draw ahead of them, green and sweet and a little sour underneath, the smell of sap standing in a stripped stalk in the sun, and it got into her chest and sat there like a hand pressed flat against her breastbone. She had not smelled it since the spring her father was buried. She had told herself on the train out of Fort Smith that she would not smell it again, that Kansas was cattle country and this man's letter had said cattle, and that whatever she was walking into it would at least be a thing she had never done before. Then they topped the last rise, and there it was below her. 140 acres of sweet cane standing 11 feet high in the bottom, red-jointed and heavy-headed, rocking in one slow sheet from the north end to the south like water tilted in a pan. "That's the cane bottom," Judson Tidwell said. He said it like a man naming a chore he had been tired of for years. "Been in cane since my father broke it. It's good ground, and it's the wrong crop, and I have never once got shut of it." She did not answer. She had her hands folded on the bundle in her lap, and she was counting the rows off with her eyes, and she made it 40 rows to the wagon track, and she did not say that either. He was a big man, bigger than the picture she had built out of 2 letters and a photograph 2 years old. 6'2" if he was an inch, heavy through the chest and the shoulders. A short, dark beard, dark brown hair pushed flat by the hatband, and a pair of steady dark eyes that had gone over her once at the depot in Hollow Rock, careful and quick, and had not gone over her again since. He drove with his sleeves rolled and his forearms brown to the elbow. He had taken her carpet bag out of her hand at the platform without asking, and had set it in the wagon box as though it weighed nothing. And then he had reached for the other bundle, the long one wrapped in oilcloth and tied at both ends with binder twine, and she had said, quietly, "No, thank you. I will keep that one." He had let it go. That was the first thing she knew about him. A man who lets a thing go the first time it is refused is a rare article, and she had put it away in her mind where she put things. The bundle lay across her knees now. Inside it were a long-handled copper skimmer worn thin on one edge, a wooden paddle with the hook of a man's thumb burned into the handle, a folded square of unbleached strainer cloth boiled white, a set of iron notching gouges in a leather roll, and a glass float in a tin case for testing the weight of cane juice, with the numbers on its paper scale utterly meaningless to her, and one deep scratch cut across it by her father's knife at the only place on the scale she had ever needed to know. "You are quiet," he said. "I am looking. At the cane. At all of it." That was true, and it was not the whole truth. She was looking at the fence corners and the gate hangings and the state of the grass, because a place tells on itself. Looking also kept her eyes off the boards nailed up at the section lines with white lettering on them, and off the printed card the depot agent had handed up to her, which she had thanked him for and put in her sleeve without a glance. The letters had never, once in her life, meant anything at all. Print was a fence around a field she had never been in. The road ran along the creek under the sycamores, and then the timber opened, and the place stood out in the low sun. A long white house of sawn lumber with a deep porch and a stone chimney at either end. Pole corrals, a barn with a shake roof gone silver, a windmill turning slow, and beyond the barn under an open shed the shape of a cane mill with its sweep pole down. And past that, a rock furnace with a sheet iron pan on it and grass grown up through the ash pit. Nobody had boiled on that furnace in a while. She could see that from the wagon. A furnace that has been fired that season has a scorched apron of bare dirt around it, and no grass in the ash pit at all. That your mill? It was my father's mill, he said. We run it 3 weeks in the fall, and we get out of it what we get out of it. What do you get out of it? He laughed once, without much in it. Trouble and a barrel of black stuff nobody in the house will eat. There were 3 people on the porch steps and a 4th in the yard. The one in the yard was a boy of about 5, in a shirt that had been cut down out of something bigger, holding a wooden horse by one leg and standing very still out in the open ground. A young thing that had decided not to run and had decided nothing else yet. On the steps stood an old woman in a black stuff dress and a white apron 60-odd, spare and straight, with her hair pulled back so tight it lifted her eyebrows, and her hands folded at her waist, or for Ray, who had kept the house since the burying and had written that fact into one line of Judson Tidwell's letter herself, or so Hester had been told. Below her on the second step was a lean, sun-browned man of about 45 in a hat gone the color of the road, the foreman, with one boot up and his arms across his knee. And on the top step, in a blue dress with the hem let down twice and a pair of shoes that were plainly her mother's cut smaller, stood a girl of 9. The girl had a letter in her hand. Hester saw it before the wagon stopped. It was folded in 3 to go into a pocket, and it had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had gone furry and white, and the girl was holding it against the front of her dress with both hands, the way you hold a thing you have been given charge of. The horses stopped. The wheels rocked and settled. Nobody on the porch said anything. Judson Tidwell got down and came around and held up his hand, and Hester took it and stepped down into the yard with the oilcloth bundle under her arm, and she stood in the open ground about 8 feet from the boy with the wooden horse, in a butternut brown calico dress with a mended elbow, a coarse apron she had put on at Fort Smith, because she did not own a traveling dress and was not going to pretend to, and a pair of lace-up boots that had been resoled twice by a man in Huntsville who did good work. "This is Hester Mabry," Judson said. "Mother Ray keeps our house. Nate Ostrander runs the outfit. That's Tobe." "And this, I read your letter," the girl said. It came out of her fast, all one piece, in the voice of a child who has been holding a sentence in her mouth for 4 days. "Effie," her father said. "I read it out loud," the girl said, "at the table. Pa asked me to. I read the whole thing, both pages, and I never stuck on but one word, and that word was Arkansas." "Effie, I can read anything now," she said. "I can read the almanac and the seed book and the little print on the baking powder, and I can read the doctor book, and Miss Stroud says, Effie Tidwell." The girl stopped. Her chin came up a half-inch and her ears went red under her hair, and she looked down at the letter in her 2 hands. The old woman on the step made a small movement with her shoulders. Nate Ostrander looked away at the corral. The wind came up out of the bottom and brought the smell of the cane across the yard, and somewhere behind the barn a mule made a long complaining noise, and the windmill turned twice and knocked. Hester stood in the yard with her father's tools under her arm and waited for it, because she had known this was coming from the minute she saw the folded paper. She had known it since Fort Smith. She had known it, really, since she stood at the wicket in the post office at Cane Hill and told Mrs. Boatwright what to write, because she had made the woman put it in. In the middle of the second page, not at the end where a man skips, and read back to her 3 separate times to be certain the words were there. Mrs. Boatwright had argued. "That is not a thing you put in a letter to a man you have not met," she had said. "That is a thing you let a man find out slow, after he has got used to your face." And Hester had said, "No, ma'am, put it where he will trip on it. If he is going to send me back, I would rather ride the same train home and not have unpacked. So it was there, halfway down the second page, in Mrs. Boatwright's fine looping hand, and a 9-year-old girl had read it out loud at a supper table to her father and her brother and the housekeeper and God knew who else, 4 days ago, in this house. "Go on," Hester said. The girl looked up. "Go on and say it," Hester said. "You have got it by heart. I can see you have. Say it out." The girl unfolded the letter, though she plainly did not need to, and found the place with one finger, and read it in the flat, careful voice of a child reading aloud, one word at a time, giving every word its full weight. "I cannot read one word of this letter. Mrs. Boatwright at the post office is setting it down for me, and she will read your answer to me the same way. I have never been to school but 4 months. I am not ashamed of my hands, and I am not ashamed of my work, but I will not come into your house under a lie. So you know it now. And if that ends it, I will thank you for your kindness, and say no more about it." Then she folded the letter up again, in 3, along the furry creases. The yard was so quiet Hester could hear the creak. She stood there and let them look at her, and did nothing at all with her face, and there was nothing in her but a kind of ringing stillness, like the second after a pan is struck. Then the girl came down the steps. She came down all 3 of them and across the packed dirt and stopped in front of Hester, close enough to touch, and looked up. She had her father's dark eyes set in a small freckled face, and a mouth that had been screwed up tight for 4 days and was not tight any longer. "Then I'll read," she said. Hester did not move. "For you," the girl said, "I'll read for you. Every day. I'll read the letters when they come, and I'll read the paper, and I'll read the words on the sacks and the cans and the medicine. And if there's a paper you have got to put your name to, I'll read it to you first, all of it, even the little print at the bottom. And I won't skip any, and I won't laugh, not one time, not ever." She stood up very straight. "You can be the one that can't read," Effie Tidwell said, "and I'll be the one that can. Pa says that's how a family works. Nobody has to be all of it by theirselves." Behind her, Judson Tidwell took his hat off. He did it slowly, and he did not put it back on. He stood there in the yard with his hat down against his thigh and his hair pressed flat and his big shoulders squared, and he looked at his daughter for a long moment, and then he looked at the woman he had sent for, and his eyes had gone bright, and when he spoke his voice had gravel in it. "Well," he said. "That's settled then." He turned to the porch. "Mother Ray, we'll want supper. Nate, put the team up. Effie, take the bag." He looked back at Hester, and something in his face came loose. "Ma'am, you have had a long ride. The front room has a fire in it, and Mother Ray has made pie out of the last of the peaches, and nobody in this house is going to say another word about that letter unless you say it first." Hester found that she had not let go of the oilcloth bundle. She made herself open her hand. She gave the carpetbag to the girl, who took it in both arms and staggered a little under it, and would not let anybody help. And she walked across the yard behind them, and at the bottom of the porch steps the boy with the wooden horse stepped sideways into her path and stood in front of her, looking up, and put the horse against her skirt for 1 second and took it away again and ran. "He does that," Mother Ray said from the top step. "Don't make anything of it. He hasn't said a word to a stranger since his mother died, and he means that horse as a whole speech. The house was better inside than out. The front room had a rag carpet and a clock on the mantel and a horsehair sofa that had come a long way in a wagon, and washed curtains and swept corners, and a smell of soap and cold ash with something else under it, faint and dark and burnt, that Hester's nose picked up before she had her shawl off. She turned her head to find it. It was on the table, a stone crock with a cloth over it, set out with the butter and the salt, and beside it a spoon, and around the spoon a dried ring the color of harness oil. She lifted the cloth without asking. The stuff inside was black. Not amber, not red, not the deep clean brown of good country syrup with the sun in it when you tip the crock. Black and thick past pouring, with a scum of fine gray crust dried around the inside of the neck and a smell coming off it that she knew in the roots of her teeth, scorch and green blade, and cane that had lain cut in a field through a warm rain. She put the cloth back. "That's ours," Nate Ostrander said from the door. He had come in with the carpet bag, and he was watching her, not unkindly. "Made it right here in October. 90 gallon of it in the smokehouse yet, and the hands won't touch it, and I don't blame them. We give a lot of it to the hogs." "Do the hogs eat it?" He thought about that. "The hogs are not particular," he said, "but they are not enthusiastic." Supper was fried chicken and cream gravy and beans cooked with a hock and light bread and the peach pie, and it was good, and the old woman had gone to trouble, and Hester ate more than she meant to. Nobody asked her a question about herself. That was arranged, she understood after the first 10 minutes. There was a decision behind it, made before she got there. Instead, they talked around her. Easy, letting her sit in it. Judson Tidwell said almost nothing and passed her things before she reached for them. The salt, the bread, the butter, so that she never once had to ask, and she noticed that too, and put it where she put things. And Effie read. She read the whole meal out of a paper folded next to her plate, because it turned out this was a thing that happened in that house every night. She read the Hollow Rock items and the county items and the market column in her flat, careful voice, with her finger under the line and her nose 4 inches off the print, and her father let her go on, and once he said, "That's a hard one," sound it, and she sounded it, and got it. Hester sat with her hands around a coffee cup and listened. She had heard reading before. She had heard a clerk rattle a bill of lading at her father, fast and bored and half of it swallowed. She had heard Mrs. Boatwright read her own letters back to her at the wicket in a voice pitched low so the room could not hear, kind and quick and a little pitying. She had never in her life heard anybody read to her slow. The girl came to the market column and stopped and made a noise. What her father said. "Sorghum," Effie said. "Hollow Rock, sorghum, common grades, 18 to 20 cents the gallon. Dull. What's dull mean?" "It means nobody wants it," Nate said. "It means nobody wants that," Hester said. It came out before she had chosen to say it. Every head at the table came around. She set the cup down. "I beg your pardon," she said. "That was not my place, my first night." "No," Judson said. "Say it. I have said it. Say the rest of it." She looked at him down the length of the table. He had not raised his voice at all. He was sitting back with one arm over the chair and his supper finished, and those steady dark eyes on her, and there was nothing in his face but a plain willingness to wait as long as it took. "Common grades," she said. "That is the word they print when what they mean is dirty. Nobody wants dirty syrup at any price, and 18 cents is not a price. It is a way of saying no politely. There is no such thing as a bad sorghum crop, mister. There is only cane cut wrong, hauled slow, milled dull, boiled hot, and skimmed lazy, and the whole valley doing it the same wrong way at the same time, so that everybody agrees the crop is bad, and nobody has to be the one that is wrong." The clock ticked on the mantel. "That crock on your sideboard," she said, was cane that lay in the field past 2 days, in the warm, and it went a little sour before it ever saw the rollers, and the blades were left on so there is grass in it, and the seed heads went through so there is starch in it, and it was boiled in a pan set too close to the fire on the near end so it took a scorch, and the skim was let go till it set and then stirred back in. Any one of those things by itself makes syrup you can sell. All 5 together makes hog feed. And you were kind enough not to say so to me in front of the hogs. Nate Ostrander made a sound into his coffee. I ate that stuff all winter, he said, and I could not have told you one word of why it was bad. I would have told you the cane was bad. The cane in that bottom, Hester said, is the best sweet cane I have seen since I left Washington County, and it is going past its time while we sit here. And somebody ought to be ashamed, and it is not the cane. Nobody spoke. Then Judson Tidwell put both hands flat on the table and leaned forward, and for the first time since the depot she had his whole attention, all of it at once, and it was a considerable thing to be under. Say that again, he said. Slow and Effie, get the pencil. They sat at that table until the lamp wanted filling. Effie wrote. She wrote with her tongue between her teeth and her elbow out, and she wrote everything. Because she had been told to, and because nobody had ever handed her a job that mattered before, and she was not going to be the one who let a word get away. She filled 4 sheets of a copybook her father tore out of the ledger. Hester talked with her hands. She did not know she was doing it. She talked about the 2 days, cut to mill, and her right hand made the flat sweep of a cane knife, and her left made the wagon. She talked about the blades, and both hands went down a stalk. Stripping, she named the seed heads and made a small snapping motion with her thumb. She came to the skimmer, and her wrist turned over. Easy, the way a wrist turns when it has done a thing 40,000 times. Wait, Effie said. Wait, how do you spell skimmings? I have got no idea in this world, Hester said. The girl looked up, and something happened in her face, a kind of delighted horror, and then she bent back down and wrote it as it sounded and went on. Twice Judson Tidwell stopped her and asked a question, and both times it was the right question. He did not say yes or no to anything, and she understood that he was a man who did his deciding somewhere out of sight and then came back with it finished. At 9 o'clock, Mother Ray stood up and said the child had school in the morning, and the argument about that was short, and the girl lost it. I'll show you your room, the old woman said to Hester. It is Ivy's old sewing room, and I have had the window open in it 3 days, and a fire is laid. At the foot of the stairs, Effie stopped and turned around, with the copybook against her chest. You have got to hear it read back, she said. That's the rule. Miss Stroud says if you write down what somebody said, you have got to read it back to them, or you might have wrote it wrong and they'd never know. Miss Stroud is a sensible woman. So can I read it back? Tomorrow? Tomorrow, Hester said. Before school or after? Before, if you are quick. I'm quick, said Effie Tidwell, and went up the stairs 2 at a time. The sewing room had a narrow bed with a quilt on it, in a wedding ring pattern, and a chair, and a washstand, and a window that looked south over the cane. The fire had been laid with dry sycamore, and it took at the first match. Somebody had put a pitcher of water and a glass on the stand, and beside them a piece of cake wrapped in a napkin, in case, and Hester stood looking at that for a while. Then she unwrapped the oilcloth bundle and laid the tools out on the foot of the bed and looked at those instead. And the glass float in its tin case with the scratch across the paper scale. She had watched him make that scratch. She had been 11. He had held the float up to the window with the light through it and said, Hetty, girl, you cannot read the figures, and I shall not live forever. So we will do it this way. When the juice floats it to my mark, it is ready for the pan." And he had cut the line with his knife and rubbed dirt into it so it would show. She had gone up in front of a schoolhouse once, 4 months when she was 5 and 6. She could remember that the letters would not hold still, and that a boy behind her made a noise every time she was called on. In the morning her father came in with his hat in his hand and took her out, because there was nobody at the mill to skim, and the season does not wait for a school. He had never once said he was sorry for that. He had said other things instead. "There is not a man in this county," he had said out loud and in front of people, "can call the flake off the paddle as close as you can." She banked the fire and went to bed and did not sleep for a long time, and it was not the strange room. It was the smell coming in the window off a bottom of cane standing past its time, which is a smell like a clock ticking. She was up at 4. She had meant to be quiet, and she was, and it did no good, because when she came down into the kitchen with her boots in her hand, the old woman was already at the stove with the fire going and the coffee on. "I never got out of the habit," Mother Ray said. "Sit down. There is biscuit in 5 minutes, and I have no intention of talking to you before I have had my coffee, so you may have yours in peace." They sat in the dark kitchen with the stove ticking and the window going gray, and drank it, and neither of them said one word, and it was the first easy 15 minutes Hester had had since Fort Smith. Then the old woman put her cup down. "I am going to say a thing," she said, "and then leave off. He did not send for a cook. He has got one, and she is sitting across the table from you. He sent for you, because that boy has not spoken to a stranger in 2 years, and that girl has been mothering the pair of them since she was 7, and she is 9. And it is bending her. He wrote to that paper in a low way, and he is ashamed of it, and he would not tell you so in a year. He has not told me anything at all. No, and he will not. And you will have to go on and live in the house with him regardless. That is the whole of my advice. Now here is the biscuit." At first light Hester walked the place. Judson found her at the mill shed an hour later with her sleeves pushed up and her arm in the works to the shoulder. It was a 3-roller iron mill on a bed of sills, with a long sweep pole to hitch a mule to and a circular track worn a foot deep by 50 years of the same mule. The frame had sprung on the near side, so the rollers stood a hair open, and a hair open on a cane mill is money on the ground, because the pumice comes out damp and a fifth of the crop stays in the trash pile. "You are in the mill," Judson said. "I am. Anything in there? Your frame is sprung, and your rollers want shimming and setting up tight, and there is a woman in Washington County who would have told you that from the road by the sound of it running." She pulled her arm out and stood up and wiped her hands down her apron and left 2 brown streaks. "How much cane do you put through in a day?" "I could not tell you." "How many gallons did you make last fall?" 90 some in the smokehouse. "Call it 140 made. Off 140 acres. He turned his head. "Off about 9 acres of it," he said. "We cut what we can boil and we feed the rest off to the stock standing, or we let it go down. The bottom is winter feed. It has always been winter feed. My father put it in cane because cane will make more feed off that ground than corn will. And the syrup was always a side thing we did in October because he liked to do it. 9 acres. About Mr. Tidwell, she said, there is 130 acres of first-rate sweet cane out there that you are feeding to cows. I know exactly what is out there, he said, and I have known for 11 years. And every fall I have stood on this exact spot and said the same words to myself. And then I have gone and looked at that pan and that furnace and that black stuff in the crock, and I have thought, Well, more of that is not worth having. What would you have me do? Make 1,000 gallons nobody will eat instead of 100? No. Then what? Make 11,000 gallons they will fight over. He did not laugh. She had watched his face for the laugh, and it did not come, and that was the second thing she knew about him. Come and look at the furnace, she said, and then I will tell you what it costs, and then you can go and do your deciding wherever it is that you do it. They went and looked at the furnace. It was a rock arch, laid dry, no mortar, sunk a foot into the ground and grown over. The pan on it was sheet iron, 12 feet by 4, flat-bottomed, with no baffles in it at all, and it had been burnt through in 2 places near the firebox end and patched with a piece of stovepipe iron riveted on by somebody in a hurry. Hester stood at the burnt end and put her hand on the patch. There, she said. That is your scorch. The near end of a flat pan sits right over the fire, and the syrup lies there and burns while you are finishing the far end, and every gallon out of this pan has a taste of it, and you cannot skim it out or settle it out afterward. You want a pan with baffles, so the juice has to walk. It goes in green and thin at the cool end, and comes out amber and heavy at the hot end, and it never sits still long enough to take a scorch. 1 pan does the work of 6 kettles, and 1 hand can run it. What does a pan like that cost? In Arkansas, $60, made to order at a tin shop. And I do not know what it is here. It is a made thing. Sheet iron soldered up with copper rivets, and a set of iron partitions and 4 draw-off cocks, and the man that makes it has got to know what he is making, or you will get a pan with a low corner, and you will fight it for 20 years. And the furnace. Tear it out. Every rock. It is laid dry, it leaks air, and a fire you cannot govern is the whole of the difference between what is in that crock and what a man in Kansas City will pay for. Laid up in brick with clay for mortar, 1 firebox, a flue that draws, and a stack at the far end tall enough to pull. Go on. Settling trough. 12 feet of 2-inch plank, pitched, with a plug in the low end, under a roof, and clean enough to eat off. Everything off that pan sits in it overnight before it sees a barrel, and what settles out stays in it, and you draw the clear off the top. Go on. Strainer cloth, 8 yards, unbleached, and a wash pot to boil it in every night. Barrels, tight. And I will smell the inside of every one, and any barrel that has had coal oil or fish in its life goes on the fire. You are not asking for a lick of it for yourself, he said. I am asking you for the mill and the furnace and the pan and the trough and the cloth and the barrels. Hester said, which is every asking I have got. How many hands? Cutting and stripping, all you have got and all you can hire. For 3 weeks, milling. 1 man and 1 mule and a boy. The pan is me. The night pan is me. And I will want 2 that can be taught to skim, and I would rather have 2 that have never done it than 1 who thinks he has. Because a man who has boiled it wrong for 20 years will fight me at 2 in the morning, and a boy who has never seen it will do what I say and be proud of it. Judson Tidwell stood looking at the burnt pan for a while. Then he said, Nate, the foreman came out from behind the shed where he had plainly been standing for some minutes. Nate, how many brick will it take? I would not know a brick from a bar of soap, Nate Ostrander said. But Isham Ford laid the flue on his own place, and it draws like a barn afire. And he has got nothing to do this month, and he has got a mill of his own that is broke down, and he is sick about it. Then go and get Isham Ford. Today? Now, Judson said. And Nate. Send Ollie in to Hollow Rock and have him ask the depot agent to wire Fort Scott about a pan. 12 by 4 baffled, 4 cocks. Ask what one costs and how soon. Nate Ostrander stood there a second longer than he needed to. You are going to spend money on the cane bottom, he said. It appears I am. Well, Nate said, I have wanted somebody to for 11 years, and I never once expected it to be you. He looked at Hester and the corner of his mouth went and he touched his hat. Ma'am, if you want two that have never boiled, I have got a boy named Ollie Pruitt that has never done anything at all, and he is willing as a pup. He went. Hester stood in the wet grass with her hands in her apron and her heart going harder than she wanted to admit, and beside her the big man in the canvas coat put his hat back on and looked out at the bottom where the sun was just coming onto the tops of the cane and turning the whole 140 acres the color of a new penny. You have not asked me the price, she said. No, most men would. I have got a bottom full of feed I do not need, he said, and a dead crop I have been ashamed of since my father died, and a stone crock in my house that my hired men will not put on their bread. Whatever the pan costs, I have already paid more than that for the privilege of doing nothing. He turned around. But I will ask you something else, he said. You came out here on 2 letters and a picture. You have been in this house one night. You have not said one word about what you were sent for, and neither have I. And I have been up since 3 trying to work out how to say it without it sounding like a bill of goods. Say it badly, then. All right. He took his hat off again and turned it in his hands. My wife has been dead 2 years in January. I did not write to that paper because I was lonesome, though I am, and I am not going to stand here and lie to you about it. I wrote because my girl is 9 years old and she has been carrying this house on her back, and my boy has not said one word out loud to a stranger since the burying. And I have watched the pair of them, and I have not been able to do one thing for them. And a man will get low enough to write to a paper. I am not proud of how you got here. I read the advertisement, Hester said. Or rather, I did not. Mrs. Boatwright read it to me twice, and I made her read the second half over. What did it say? It said a rancher in Kansas, 36, sober, 2 children, wants a wife who is not afraid of work and does not mind being some distance from town. She almost smiled. There were 11 of them on that page, and yours was the only one that mentioned the children in the first line instead of the last. That is why. He looked at her for a moment. Well, he said, there it is then, there it is. I will not press you for anything, he said. Not for any of it. There is a room, and there is work, and there is Mother Ray in the house, and nobody in this county is going to say a word out of line. And if, in the spring, you want to go home to Arkansas, I will put the money in your hand and drive you to the cars myself, and there will be no argument about it. And if I do not? Then in the spring, Judson Tidwell said, I will ask you a question, and you will already know what it is, and you can be thinking it over the whole winter and take as long as you like. Hester Mabry looked out at the cane. Mr. Tidwell, she said, I have got about 11 days before that bottom goes past saving, and I cannot think about one single thing until it is in the barrel. Ask me in the spring. I intend to. Then go and find me 2 boys that have never boiled, she said, and tell your daughter I want her after school with that copybook, because there is going to be a great deal of counting and I cannot do the counting. Isham Ford came at noon in a spring wagon with a trowel in his hip pocket and a look on him like a man walking up to a coffin. He was a narrow, stooped, apologetic man of about 50, with a gray mustache stained yellow at one corner, and his own mill on the far side of the creek had thrown a roller shaft in September, and he had not made a gallon that year, and had been telling the county about it ever since. He walked around the rock furnace twice without saying anything. Then he said, "Who tore it out?" "Nobody yet," Hester said. "Somebody is fixing to. I am." He turned around. He looked over the burnt pan and the patched place and the grass in the ash pit, and he pushed his hat back and scratched his head with the same hand. "Ma'am, I laid the flue on my own place out of a book my brother read to me," he said, "and it draws so hard it will pull a cat off the hearth. But I have laid rock for 30 years, and I have never once been asked to build a furnace for a woman that talks like she has run one. Mr. Ford, I have run one since I was 9 years old, and I stood on a box to reach the pan. What do you want to know? How long is the pan? 12 foot. How far off the fire at the near end? 7 inches. And I want the flue floor to rise a hand's width every 3 feet going away from the box, so the draw comes up to meet the pan as the fire cools. And I want the stack at the tail end, and I want it 11 feet. And I want a damper in it I can shut with a wire from where I stand at the finishing end. Because a fire I cannot choke from the pan is a fire that will beat me at 2 in the morning." Isham Ford stood very still for a moment. "You want a damper wire," he said. "I do." "I have wanted a damper wire for 30 years, he said, "and I never once had the nerve to put one in, because my father did not have one, and I could not think of a reason he would not." He put his hat back on. "How many brick?" 1,200, and clay for mortar, and no lime, and I want the box arched, not corbelled." "Then I want 2 boys and a mule and a scraper," said Isham Ford, "and I want to be let alone." They tore the old rock furnace out on Tuesday, and it left a black rectangle in the grass with a smell of 50 years of ash coming out of it, and Tobe Tidwell stood at the edge of it the whole afternoon with his wooden horse, watching men throw rocks. The brick came from Hollow Rock in 3 loads, and Isham Ford laid the arch up in 4 days, slow and plumb, stopping twice a day to sight down it from the far end and move 1 brick. The pan came on the cars. The depot agent sent a boy out to the place at first light to say the freight had come in from Fort Scott, and Judson took the big wagon and 2 hands, and they were back by 3, and the crate came off the wagon bed onto skids, and the boards came off it, and Hester put her hand on the new sheet iron and did not take it off for a while. 12 feet long, 4 feet across, baffles soldered in so the juice, going in green at the cool tail end, had to walk down one alley and around a partition and back up the next, clear to the hot end, and could never lie still long enough to take a taste of the fire. 4 brass draw-off cocks at the finishing end, the whole thing bright as a new pail and smelling of solder and shop oil. Well, Nate Ostrander said, "She is pretty. What did she cost?" $81 laid down at the siding, Judson said, "and I once paid more for a horse that threw me." They set it on the new arch on a Friday and fired the first fire in it to dry the brick. A slow, small fire kept going all day, and Isham Ford would not let anybody put a stick on it but himself. That evening at dusk, Hester stood at the finishing end with the damper wire in her hand and pulled it, and the fire in the box 11 feet away sat down like a dog. She let it out again. The fire came up. She pulled it. It sat down. "That is the first time in my life," she said, "I have had a fire under my thumb instead of over my head." Isham Ford, standing behind her with mud to his elbows, turned his face away and blew his nose very loudly into a rag. She had the mill shims filed and the rollers set up so hard that Ollie Pruitt could not turn the sweep by hand and said so, complaining. And then they put the mule on and ran a bundle through, and the pumice came out the far side in flat, dry ribbons a man could have written on. She twisted one over a tin cup with both hands and got a single drop, and held it up, and Nate Ostrander looked at it and said, "Set them up till the mule complains." The cutting started on the first Monday in October, with every hand on the place, and 9 more hired out of Hollow Rock at $1.25 a day, which was over the going wage and which Judson paid without discussion, because Hester had said the whole business turned on speed. And on the second morning, she had her fight. It was about the blades. She wanted every leaf stripped off every stalk while it was still standing, before the knife ever touched it, and every seed head topped off and thrown to the side, and she wanted it done clean, and a stripping crew going down the rows ahead of the cutters with wooden paddles, and she said so at 4 a.m. in the lamplight of the cook's shed with 14 men eating. "That is double the work," said a hired man named Tull, not meanly, just as a fact. "We always stripped what come off easy and let the rest go through. I know you did. It all gets crushed anyhow. It does." Then what odds does it make? Hester had 2 crocks on the table before her, and she had been waiting 3 days to be asked. "Mother Ray, would you fetch the bread?" she said. They came in with a loaf and a knife and a dish of butter, and she cut 14 slices. And she poured out of the first crock onto 7 of them, and out of the second crock onto the other 7, and she pushed them down the table and said nothing at all. The first crock was the black stuff out of the smokehouse. The second was 3 gallons she had made herself the previous afternoon on the new pan, alone, out of 1 wagon load of cane she had stripped with her own hands to the last leaf, topped, hauled, milled, and boiled inside of 6 hours. And the color of it, running off the spoon in the lamplight, was the color of a good field of wheat, with the sun behind it. 14 men ate bread. There was about a quarter of a minute of complete silence in that cook shed, and then everything happened at once. Somebody said a word he apologized for. Somebody else reached across 3 men for the second crock and got his hand slapped by the man whose plate it was. Ollie Pruitt, 19 years old, ate his slice and then licked the plate, openly, in front of the whole table, and then looked up and said, "Well, I ain't sorry." Tull sat looking at his 2 pieces of bread, 1 in each hand. "That come off the same bottom," he said. "Same bottom, same cane, cut 9 hours ago. And the difference is leaves. The difference is leaves, and seed heads, and 2 days, and a fire I can choke, and a woman standing over that pan with a skimmer who does not sit down," Hester said. "There is no secret in it. There is no trick, and there is nothing bought out of a bottle. There is only whether a thing is done clear through or done part way. Part way is the black crock. Clear through is the yellow one." Tull put both slices down. "I have been raising cane for 11 years, he said, "and eating that black stuff and telling my wife that is what sorghum is. That is what everybody in this valley has been telling their wife." "Well," said Tull, and picked up his hat, "I will strip the blades." They cut and stripped and hauled for 18 days. It went like this. The stripping crew ahead in the standing cane with paddles, going down the rows so that the whole field made a dry rattling noise all day like rain on a roof. Behind them the cutters with knives, laying the stripped stalks in windrows with the butts one way. Behind them the wagons, and the rule that no stalk lay on the ground past the second sunrise, and Hester walked the rows twice a day and put her thumbnail into a joint here and there and smelled it. The mill ran from 6 in the morning until the light went. Ollie Pruitt fed it. A boy from Hollow Rock led the mule around the track, and the mule, whose name was Judge, walked 11 miles a day in a circle 30 feet across, and would not walk 1 step past the hour he was used to quitting. The juice came off the mill green and foaming into a barrel through her boiled strainer cloth, and from the barrel threw a second cloth into the tail end of the pan, and it went in green and thin and came down the allies of that pan slow. And it changed as it came, and by the fourth alley it had begun to be the color of weak tea, and by the seventh it was amber, and by the last one it walked like something with a will of its own. She stood at the hot end for 18 days. She stood there, from before light until the last cane of the day was through and the pan drawn off and washed out, and then slept 4 hours on a cot in the shed under a quilt, and got up and did it again. She skimmed constantly with the thin copper skimmer, never once letting the green scum set and sink, and every skim went down a wooden chute into a barrel outside, and that barrel went to the hogs, and the hogs were enthusiastic. She never used a thermometer because there was not one in the county, and she would not have been able to read it if there had been. She used her father's flake. Every few minutes she dipped the paddle and held it sideways and watched how the syrup left the edge. Early in the run it ran off thin, like water off a shingle. Later it ran and hesitated. At the end it stopped running altogether and came off in a broad flat sheet, 2 drops joining and hanging and letting go together in one apron. And when she saw that apron she said one word, and Ollie Pruitt opened the brass cock and the finished syrup ran out into the settling trough, hot and clear and singing in the wood. "How do you know?" Effie asked her, on the third night, sitting on an upturned box with a shawl over her nightgown, having got out of the house by a method nobody ever established. "I know because it comes off the paddle in a sheet." "But how can you tell that's the right sheet? What if it's nearly the right sheet? Then it is not the right sheet." "But how can you tell?" Hester dipped the paddle and held it out sideways under the child's nose. "Watch the edge," she said. "Not the middle, the edge. Now, see it hang there and let go all in one piece? That is syrup. If it lets go in drops, 1, 2, 3, it wants 2 minutes more. If it lets go in a sheet, and the sheet has a lip on it that curls, it has gone by and it will grain up in the barrel and be sugar and no good to anybody. There is about 4 minutes in the whole of this business where it is right, and everything else I do all day is only to be standing here awake when those 4 minutes come." Effie watched the paddle with her whole face. "Do it again," she said. Hester did it again. Again. She did it again, and again after that, and at some point the child stopped asking and simply held her hand out for the paddle, and Hester gave it to her. And a girl of 9 in a nightgown and a shawl stood over a 12-foot evaporating pan at 10:30 at night and dipped and held it sideways and watched the edge, and the syrup came off it in a broad, flat apron. And she said, in a small voice, "That's it, isn't it? That's it, right now. That is it, right now. Then say your word. You say it." Effie Tidwell took a breath. "Draw her off," she said. Ollie Pruitt opened the cock. Nobody had noticed Judson Tidwell come down from the house. He was standing at the corner of the shed in the dark outside the ring of the firelight with his hat in his hand, and he stayed there without saying anything for a good while, and then he went back up to the house and did not tell either of them he had been there. The counting began the second week, and it began because Nate Ostrander asked a simple question and got an answer that stopped him in the doorway. "How much have we made?" 206 gallon of first line, Hester said, without turning around. 81 of second, and 19 of stock. "Where is that wrote down?" "It is not wrote down." "Then how do you know it?" She put the skimmer across the pan and wiped her hands and reached up to a nail driven into the shed post above her head and took down a cord. It was a plain, hard-laid cotton cord about 6 feet long, doubled, with a loop at the top and along it, in 3 distinct runs separated by a bead of blue glass, were knots. Small, hard knots, packed close, some singly and some in tight clusters of 5. "First line," she said, and ran her thumb down the top run, feeling, not looking. "A knot is a gallon. 5 knots run together is a 5. A bead is 100. Second line, middle run. Stock, bottom," she turned the cord over, "and on the stick there, the barrels, 1 notch square is a first line barrel, 1 notch slanted is second, 1 notch with a cross cut is stock. I have never lost a count in my life, and I have never had a mill row I could not settle with a man. Because he cannot argue with a knot, he can only feel it." Nate Ostrander came and took the cord in his 2 hands and turned it over and ran his thumb down it as she had, and his face went through several things. "My grandmother had a stick like that," he said. "She kept the eggs on it. I never in my life thought about why. There is a good many of us," Hester said. Effie made a book. She did it that evening at the kitchen table without asking anybody, out of a copybook and a straight edge and a bottle of ink, ruled into 4 columns with the headings in her own hand, and she brought it out to the shed at 8:30 and held it up. "Now say them again," she said. Hester said them again off the cord. The girl wrote them down. Then she read the whole page back out loud, every figure, slow, one at a time, and then she said, "Feel your string and tell me if I have got it wrong." Hester ran her thumb down the cord. "That is right. All of it? All of it." "Then we have got 2 of them," Effie said, with enormous satisfaction. "Mine in figures and yours in knots, and if they ever don't match we'll know somebody made a mistake. And it won't be nobody's fault, it'll just be a mistake, and we'll find it." That was the arrangement, from then to the end of the season, and every single night of it the girl read the page back out loud, and every single night the woman went down the cord with her thumb, and in 8 weeks the 2 of them differed exactly twice, and both times it was the book. The neighbors started coming on the 12th of October. Isham Ford came first, and he came ashamed, standing in the yard turning his hat, because his own roller shaft was still in Fort Scott at the machine shop, and would be until December, and he had 11 acres of good cane standing in his bottom that was going to be nothing but stock feed before the month was out. "I would not ask," he said. "Only I built you the arch." "You would not have to ask if you had not built the arch," Judson said. "Bring it." But it was Hester who made the offer, and she made it standing at the pan with the skimmer in her hand, with the man and his wife and 3 of the hands looking on, and she thought about it for the length of 1 skim before she opened her mouth. "Mr. Ford," she said, "there is 2 ways I can do you. The first way is the old way. You bring your cane, we mill it and boil it on your account, we keep 1 gallon in 4 for the toll, and you take your syrup home in your own barrels and do what you like with it. That is how it has always been done. It is. Now here is the second way, and I want your wife to hear it. You bring your cane, stripped clean and milled inside of 2 days, or we will not take it. And I boil it and grate it into the same lines as ours, and it goes into the same barrels. Then in December, when the whole lot is sold, you get paid the same price a gallon we get, on your gallons, less the toll." Isham Ford chewed on that. "And if it sells for nothing, then you have got nothing, same as us. And if it sells high, then you have got high, same as us. How high could it go? I have seen clean, bright first-line syrup in tin cell in Fort Smith for better than $50, Hester said, and I have seen the same season's dirty syrup out of the same county sold in the bulk for 18 cents. And both of those men grew the same cane in the same dirt with the same rain on it. and the only difference in the world was what happened to it between the field and the barrel. Liddy Ford, who had not said a word, said 50 cents. I am not promising 50 cents. I am promising that yours will be treated like ours and paid like ours, and I have got no way to cheat you even if I wanted to, because that child there keeps the book and your gallons go in it in front of you. Effie stood up straighter than she had ever stood in her life. The Fords took the second way. So did the Kestersons 2 days later, and the Doss boys, and a widow named Pettigrew who had 4 acres and a bad hip, and who came with her cane in a borrowed wagon and stood watching the pan for 2 hours without speaking, and then said, "My husband boiled it black his whole life, and I never once told him." 4 families took the first way, the old way, the toll, and took their syrup home in their own barrels, and nobody said a word against them, and Hester milled their cane exactly as carefully as everybody else's. And one of those men came back in December and stood at the fence for a while before he could bring himself to come to the door. By the 3rd week, the mill ran from dark to dark, and the pan ran through the night, with wagons of stripped cane standing in line down the lane past the corrals, and the smell lay over the valley so thick that people in Hollow Rock, 4 miles off, said afterward they knew what the wind was doing all that October, without going outside. Then it rained. It came in warm off the south on a Thursday, and it rained for 2 days and a night, 60 degrees and wet as a mouth, and there was cut-stripped cane lying in the windrows in 4 different bottoms, because 6 wagons cannot keep up with 11 cutting crews, and when it cleared on Saturday morning, Hester walked down into the near rows with her boots going into the ankle and picked up a stalk and split it with her thumbnail and smelled it. Then she walked the whole windrow, and then the next, and then she came back up to the shed and stood in the doorway. "How much?" Judson said. "Everything cut Wednesday and Thursday." "That is 9 wagon loads." "That is 9 wagon loads." "How bad?" "It has begun to work," she said. "It is not spoiled to look at, and it is not spoiled to taste unless you know what you are tasting for. And it will mill, and it will boil, and it will make syrup, and the syrup will be a little sharp on the back of the tongue. And in 6 weeks, in a warm barrel, it will turn, and it will push the bung out. And there is no telling now which barrel it is going to be in." Ollie Pruitt, standing behind her, said, "So we run it separate and sell it cheap." "We could. That's what my daddy would do. I know it. And every man that buys it will taste sharp syrup out of this valley in January," she said, "and he will not remember that it was the cheap line. He will remember the name on the barrel." 9 wagon loads was the cane and 4 days of 14 men's labor besides, and every person in that shed knew it to the dollar, because it is the kind of arithmetic a hired hand does without meaning to. Nobody looked at Hester. They looked at Judson Tidwell. He was standing at the end of the pan with his coat off and his sleeves rolled, because he had been feeding the fire himself since 3 in the morning. He looked down the shed at the 9 loads sitting in the lane in the wet, and at his own hired men, and at Isham Ford. "Whose cane is in those 9 loads?" he asked. Ollie went and looked and came back. 6 is ours," he said. 2 is the Kestersons. 1 is the widow's. Then it is going to cost us 6 and cost them 3, Judson said, "and we will make theirs good out of ours. And I want that said out loud where the whole outfit can hear it so there is no talk about it later." He turned around. "Nate, feed it off to the stock. All of it. Today, before it heats. And Ollie, ride up to the Kestersons and tell them what happened, and tell them the gallons will be in the book anyway." Ollie Pruitt did not move. "Mr. Tidwell, that is $130 laying in the lane." "It is," Judson said. And there is a woman in this shed who has not sat down in 19 days, and who has told me the plain truth every time I have asked her for it, including twice when the truth cost me money, and I am not going to be the man who makes her put her hand to a barrel she would not put her own name on. Feed it to the cows. He picked up the fire iron and turned back to the box. And somebody, he said, get her a chair. They fed 9 wagon loads of cane to the cattle that afternoon, and the cattle had the best 2 days of their lives, and by 4 o'clock Hester was back at the hot end of the pan with the skimmer going, and there was a chair behind her, brought down from the house, and she did not sit in it once in 8 weeks, and nobody moved it either. That was the day the boy talked. He had been at the shed every day since the first fire. He had a place he stood, at the corner post out of the road, and he stood there for hours with the wooden horse in his fist, watching the mule walk his circle in the fire and the skimmer, and every so often somebody would put a hand on his head going past, and he would not look up. Hester had never once spoken to him first. She had decided that in the first week, watching him, and she held to it, and it had been the hardest piece of doing nothing of her life. That afternoon she was drawing off, and she had the tin cup she used for tasting, and she filled it a half-inch with the fresh first-line syrup off the cock, and blew on it and set it down on the mill bed at the corner post at about the height of a 5-year-old's chin. Then she went back to the pan. She heard, behind her, a very small sound of somebody trying to be quiet with a tin cup. She did not turn around. She skimmed for about 2 minutes. Then a voice said, at the level of her elbow, "It's better than the black." Hester kept the skimmer moving. There was a considerable ringing in her ears. "It is," she said. "The black one is bad. It is bad." Papa said not to say it's bad. Your papa is a polite man. The boy stood there. She could feel him deciding something. "Can I hold the string?" Tobe Tidwell said. She took the cord down off the nail and put it in his 2 hands, and he sat down on the upturned box with it, and went along it knot by knot with his thumb. All of it, both sides, clear to the end, and then started again at the top. Mother Ray came down at 5 with the coffee pail and stopped dead in the shed doorway with it in her hand. She did not say anything at all. She set the pail down on the mill bed very quietly, as though there were something asleep in the room, and she went back to the house. And Hester learned much later that the old woman had walked as far as the smokehouse and stood behind it for a while before she went in. That evening Judson came down after supper. He came down every evening now, and he had stopped pretending it was to look at the fire. He stood at the corner post with his boy asleep against his leg, and the cord of knots still wound around the child's fist. "Mother Ray told me," he said. "He told me the black syrup was bad." "That is more words than he has said to a stranger in 2 years, Judson said, "and I would like it noted that his first opinion in the world was a correct one." Hester laughed. It got away from her before she could stop it, and it was the first time she had laughed out loud on that place, and it came out cracked and undignified and went on longer than it should have, and she had to put the skimmer down and put both hands over her face for a second. When she took them away, Judson Tidwell was looking at her with an expression she could not do one thing with. "I said I would not press you," he said. "You did. I am keeping to it. I know you are. I want you to know that it is taking some doing," he said, and picked his son up off the floor, wooden horse and knotted cord and all, and carried him up to the house. The frost came on the 18th of November, and the last cane went through the rollers 4 days after it, and on the last night they burned the last of the bagasse in the box and let the fire go out on its own, and 14 men and 2 women and 2 children stood around a warm brick arch in the dark and did not want to go to bed. Ollie Pruitt had got hold of a fiddle from somewhere and could not play it, and played it anyway. In the settling shed and the smokehouse and along 2 walls of the barn stood the season. It stood in barrels, tight cooperage, every one smelled into before it was filled, ranked 3 deep on skids, and painted on the head of each by Effie Tidwell was a single mark, a square, a slant, or a cross. Square was first line, bright pale amber, thin enough to pour cold, clean as spring water held up to a lamp, no cloud, no grain, nothing on the back of the tongue but cane. That went into 1-gallon tin cans with soldered caps, 6 to a wooden case, and there were more cases than anybody had expected. Slant was second line. Darker, heavier, a good honest country syrup with a little more of the field in it, made from cane cut later, and from the tail ends of runs. And there is not a thing in the world wrong with second line, and every woman in that county would have taken it home and been glad. Cross was stock. 60-odd gallons of it, and it went to the hogs, and the hogs continued enthusiastic. On the last night, Hester took the cord down off the nail, and Effie brought the book out to the shed, and they did it in front of everybody, the child reading and the woman feeling, and the total came out the same both ways, and Nate Ostrander wrote it on the wall of the shed with a carpenter's pencil, and it is on that wall still. 11,300 gallons, 9,400 of first line, 1,830 odd of second. The rest stock, off 130 acres, Nate said, and Ford's 11, and the Kestersons, and the Widow's 4, and the Doss ground. Off cane, Hester said, that was standing in this valley last year too. Judson Tidwell was leaning in the doorway with his arms folded. Now? He said, who buys it? That turned out to be the hard part. Ephraim Doss at the store in Hollow Rock came out in a buggy on the 2nd of December, walked down the ranks with his hands behind his back, tasted the first line off a spoon, and stood a minute with his eyebrows up. That is uncommon good syrup, he said. It is. I will give you 30 cents the gallon for the lot. No, Hester said. Ephraim Doss blinked. 30 is 12 cents over what I paid anybody in this county last year. It is. Then I do not follow you, ma'am. Mr. Doss, you will set it in the bulk barrel beside the coal oil and draw it off into people's own jugs, and by February it will have stood in a warm store with a loose bung, and it will taste of the store. And the next time somebody asks a man in Hollow Rock whether dry wood syrup is any account, he will say, well, it is sorghum, and there we all are again. And what would you have me do? Buy 2 cases of it in the tin at 55 and set them on the shelf where the coffee is, and keep a bulk barrel well away from them, she said. And if you have not sold them out inside of 3 weeks, I will take them back and give you your money. 55 cents. For syrup a woman can carry home in her own hand and set on her own table with the cap not broke. Ephraim Doss stood there with his hat pushed back. You have never sold a thing in your life, have you? He said. Not one thing. My father sold. I boiled. Well, it appears you watched him. He put his hat straight. I will take 2 cases and pay the 55, and I shall not take you up on the offer to give it back, because I have a suspicion I would look a fool inside a week. He sold them out in 9 days and came back for 6 more cases and did not haggle. But 9 cases was not a season. It was Effie who found the buyer, and she found him on a piece of paper that had been wrapped around a slab of bacon. She was reading it. She read everything by then. She read the newspaper the eggs came in, and the labels off the tomato cans, and the fine print in the almanac, and the cards that came in the tobacco, and she read them out loud, all of them, every evening, because there was somebody in that house who listened to every word. Wholesale grocers, she read out. Commission merchants. Fruits, sugars, syrups, and coffees. Kansas City, Missouri. She turned the greasy paper over. There is a man's name, and a street, and a number. Everybody at the table looked up. Read it again, Hester said. Effie read it again. Hester sat back with her hands flat on the table. Syrups, she said. Not sorghum. Syrups. That is a house that buys New Orleans molasses and maple by the barrel and knows the difference between one and the other and pays a different price for each, which is the whole of what I have been trying to say to everybody in this county since October. She stood up. Effie, get the ink. The letter went out on the 6th of December, and it took 4 hours to write, and it was the plainest letter Kansas ever mailed. She dictated it, and the child wrote it. And twice Judson started to suggest a better word, and both times Hester said no, leave it, and he left it. It said that the writer had better than 11,000 gallons of Kansas cane syrup made that fall on Drywood Creek. It said all of it had been made from cane strip standing and milled inside of 2 days of cutting, on an evaporator with baffles over a brick arch with a damper, skimmed continuous, and never once allowed to scorch, and settled overnight before barreling. It said samples of both saleable lines went in the same shipment, marked with a square and a slant, drawn at random in front of witnesses. It said the writer would not sell in the bulk to be drawn out of a store barrel, and would take less money to see it sold in the tin. And it said, at the bottom, in the middle of the page where a man would trip on it, the woman who made this syrup cannot read or write and has dictated this letter to a child of 9 who has read it back to her twice. If that signifies against us, we would rather know it now. Judson read that line over the girl's shoulder and stood there a long moment. Take it out, he said. No, it has got nothing to do with the syrup. It has got everything to do with whether I am dealt with straight, Hester said. I have been in a room where a man learned it after the bargain was made, and I have watched him go back over the bargain in his head, looking for where he had been cheated. If it is going to matter, let it matter in Kansas City in December, and not at my kitchen table in March. He looked at her for a while. Leave it in, he said to his daughter. They sent 3 tins packed in a box with straw, and the box went from the siding at Hollow Rock on the 8th, and then there was nothing to do but the winter. It snowed on the 12th. It snowed again the week before Christmas. The cattle came down into the bottoms and ate the cane stubble and the tops. Isham Ford's roller shaft came back from Fort Scott, and he put it in and had nothing to grind. Ollie Pruitt learned 3 whole tunes. Nobody wrote from Kansas City. By the 3rd week, Hester had stopped going out to the gate when the mail came and had started sending Effie, which fooled precisely nobody. She filled the days. She whitewashed the shed out. She oiled and wrapped and hung her father's skimmer. She went up and down the ranks of barrels with a lamp, tapping the heads, listening. You are counting them again, Mother Ray said one evening. I am not counting. They are counted. You have been down that shed 3 times today. Yes, Hester said, and did not say anything else, and the old woman put a cup of coffee in front of her and did not say anything else either, which was the great virtue of Orpha Ray. The letter came on the 4th of January. Effie read it in the kitchen with her coat still on and snow melting off her shoes, and she read it as she read everything, flat and careful and slower than anybody wanted, and by the 3rd line Mother Ray had sat down. The house wanted to know whether the samples were fairly representative of the bulk. It said that the sample marked with a square was, And here Effie stopped and sounded it out twice. Considerably superior to the general run of sorghum syrup offered in that market. It said that their Mr. Corbin Vale would come out on the cars on the 9th to draw from the barrels himself and would want to see the apparatus. It did not say one word about the woman who could not read. Corbin Vale was a short round man of 60 in a town overcoat and rubber overshoes, and he came off the train at Hollow Rock siding with a leather case and the face of someone who has been to a great many farms and been disappointed at every one. He shook hands with Judson. He took in the house, and then the barn, and then he said, "Where is the pan?" They took him to the shed. He walked the length of the evaporator with his overshoes squeaking, and he ran his finger down the inside of one of the alleys and looked at his finger. He looked up at the brick arch. He got down on one knee in his town overcoat in the ash and looked up the flue. "Who built this arch?" "Isham Ford," Judson said. "Neighbor of ours." "There is a rise in the flue floor, a hand's width every 3 foot, Hester said, and a damper wire. To the finishing end, so I can choke the fire from where I stand." Corbin Vale got up off his knee and brushed at his coat, and did not look at her yet. "Show me the barrels," he said. He drew from 19 barrels, picked himself from all 3 ranks, one of them from behind a post that had to be moved, and Ollie Pruitt worked the thief for him, and every sample went into a numbered glass and was held up against the shed window with the snow light coming through it, and tipped and set back. Then he tasted 11 of them, and between each one he ate a piece of dry soda cracker out of his coat pocket. Nobody in that shed said one word for 40 minutes. At the end of it, he closed the case. "Who keeps your record?" he said. "I do," said Effie Tidwell. Corbin Vale looked down at a girl of 9 in a coat too big for her, standing beside a barrel with a copybook against her chest, and something in the front of his face moved for the first time that day. "Do you now?" "Yes, sir." "In figures." "And she keeps it in knots." The girl pointed. "And every night I read mine out, and she feels hers, and we see if they come out the same, and in the whole fall they only ever come out different twice, and both times it was me." "May I see the knots?" Hester took the cord off the nail and put it in his hand. He turned it over. He ran his thumb down the top run and along it, and found the blue bead, and stopped, and ran it on. He was a man who had been buying farm produce for 35 years, and it took him about 4 seconds to understand exactly what he was holding. A knot is a gallon, 5 run together is a 5, a bead is 100. And the sticks. Barrels, square is first line, slant is second, cross is stock. There are no figures anywhere in this system at all. No, sir. And your count. 4 gallons over the 11,300, Hester said. And I took the 4 off because there is a little in the bottom of a barrel that a thief will not raise, and I would rather be short than long when a man is paying me. Corbin Vale stood there in the cold shed with a cotton cord in his 2 hands. Then he handed it back and took his gloves off and said, "Get your girl to write." They stood the barrel's count off against the book, and it took an hour, and the book and the cord and Corbin Vale's own tally of what he had drawn came out inside of 6 gallons of one another, and he said that in 35 years he had never once had a farm count come inside of 60. Then he sat down on an upturned box in the shed with the case on his knees, and he said it out loud, so that everybody in the doorway heard it, which was Judson Tidwell, and Nate Ostrander, and Ollie Pruitt, and Mother Ray in her shawl, and Isham, and Liddy Ford, who had walked over when they saw the buggy, and the widow Pettigrew's grandson who had been sent to watch. I will take the whole of it, he said. Both lines. Every gallon. At what? Judson said. At 55 cents the gallon. Delivered to the cars at Hollow Rock, in the tin for the first line and the tin at my cost, and I will take the second line in barrel at the same money. Which I am doing, because I want the first line and I will not nickel you over the rest of it and have somebody else get the whole of your crop next October. He wrote it out on a printed form off his knee and blew on it. 11,300 gallons, he said, at 55 cents is $6,215. Effie Tidwell made a sound like a hiccup. Nate Ostrander pulled his hat off and then did not seem to know why he had and put it back on. Corbin Vale held the paper out toward Hester and then stopped, halfway, and turned his wrist and held it out toward the child instead. Read it to her, he said. All of it. The little print at the bottom, too. I will wait, and I will not talk while you do it, and if she has got a question about any line in it, I will answer that question before anybody signs anything. The girl took the paper in both hands. She read it out in the cold shed in her careful reading voice. All of it. Both sides. The terms and the delivery and the dates and the 2 lines of small print at the bottom about the cans, and it took a considerable while, and nobody moved, and the only other sound in the building was the snow sliding off the roof. When she got to the end, she said, "That is all of it. There isn't any more." Hester Mabry stood with her hands in her apron. "Then I have no questions," she said. Judson signed it, because the cane was his, and the ground was his, and the barrels were his. Then Corbin Vale turned the paper around and put his finger on a blank place beside it. "And here," he said. "That is not needed," Judson said. "It is not needed," Corbin Vale agreed. "I want it anyway, whatever mark she likes." So Hester Mabry took the pen in a hand that had held a skimmer for 8 weeks without shaking, and it shook, and she put it down on the paper and made the mark she had made on every bill of lading her father ever sent out of Cane Hill, a small square with a line across the corner, which was the notch for first line, cut with a pen instead of a gouge. Corbin Vale looked at it and nodded once and put the form in his case. "I will want everything you make next fall," he said. "And ma'am, if you ever want to leave this outfit, my house will hire you to travel and teach that arch and that pan to every grower on the Neo show, and they will pay you a wage that will embarrass everybody standing in this doorway." "I am obliged to you," Hester said, "but I am fairly well suited where I am." They paid out at the wagon on a Saturday in the 3rd week of January, in the cold, with the money brought out from the bank at Fort Scott in a canvas sack and counted twice on the tailgate in front of every man who had a gallon in the book. Effie read every name and every figure out loud before a dollar moved. Isham Ford got $181 and change for 11 acres of cane he had expected to feed to his cows, and he stood holding it in both hands and could not get it into his pocket, and his wife had to take it off him and put it away herself. The widow Pettigrew got $62 for 4 acres and a bad hip, and looked at it a while and said to nobody in particular, 41 years, and did not explain it. The Kestersons got the gallons they had lost in the warm rain, paid at the same rate out of the Tidwell share, exactly as Judson had said in the shed, and the elder Kesterson shook his hand about it twice and then a 3rd time at the gate. And one of the 4 men who had taken the old way, the toll, and had carried his own syrup home in his own barrels in October, came and stood at the fence for the better part of half an hour before he could make himself walk up the lane. "I have got 110 gallon in my smokehouse," he said, "that I cannot give away. Next October," Hester said, "strip it standing and bring it inside of 2 days, and we will put it in with ours. That is all? That is all it ever was. The money did what money does. The house got a roof on the north side. A second pan was ordered from Fort Scott in February. To sit alongside the first on an Arch Isham Ford began drawing in the dirt with a stick before the snow was off, and Judson Tidwell put $300 into the subscription school at Hollow Rock, on the condition that Miss Winifred Stroud be paid through the summer term as well as the winter one, and Miss Stroud, who had taught one child her letters and had no idea what she had set in motion, came out to say thank you, and stayed to supper, and was shown the pan. The lessons started the first week of February. They were Effie's idea and Effie's rules. An hour after supper at the kitchen table, no laughing, no skipping, and no telling anybody, that last one lasting about 4 days. They began with her name, because the girl said that was how it was done. H, and then E, and then S, and the letters would not hold still any better at 28 than they had at 6. And there were 2 evenings in that first month when Hester Mabry put the pencil down flat on the table and sat with her hands in her lap and said she was too old and it was too late and there was no call for it anyway. And both times the child said, "All right, then read me the next one," and waited. Tobe learned his alongside her. He was 5 and it came to him like water running downhill, and he was insufferable about it, and it did her more good than any encouragement anybody could have offered. By the middle of March, she could read her own name, and the boys, and the girls, and cat, and hat, and cow, and the word sorghum, which Effie had taught her out of turn and on purpose. In April, the cane came up in the bottom in rows a hand high and green as anything in this world. Judson found her down there on a Sunday evening standing at the head of the rows with her shawl over her arms, and he came and stood beside her, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the killdeer went over calling. "It is spring," he said. "It is. I said I would ask you a question in the spring. You did. I have been thinking about how to say it since about the second week of October," Judson Tidwell said, "and everything I come up with sounds like a man reading out of a book, and I do not want it to be that. So I am going to say it plain, and you can do what you like with it. I would like you to marry me, not for the children, though they would carry you off on their shoulders. Not for the syrup, though I am told it cleared $6,215, and I am told that by every man I meet on the road between here and Hollow Rock. For me, because I have been up at 3 a.m. with the fire for 8 weeks, and I would do the whole of it again this fall for the company." Hester looked out at the green rose. "I cannot read the service," she said. "The preacher reads the service. I will have to make my mark on the book." "You will not," said her stepdaughter-to-be, from about 4 feet behind them in the cane, where she had been for some considerable time. They were married in the front room of that house in the last week of April, by a preacher out of Fort Scott, with Mother Ray in her good black, and Nate Ostrander in a collar, and Ollie Pruitt playing the fiddle badly on the porch, and the Fords and the Kestersons, and the widow Pettigrew, and a boy in a clean shirt holding a wooden horse. When the book was brought and the pen was handed across, Hester Mabry did not make a square with a line across the corner. She wrote her name. It took her a while. It came out large and slow, and it leaned, and the last letter went uphill, and when she straightened up the room was extremely quiet. Effie Tidwell came and stood at her elbow and put her finger under it. "Hester," she read out, in her flat, careful voice, one word at a time, exactly as she had read out a market column and a bill of sale and a letter from Kansas City, and the words a woman had dictated to her about herself in December. "That says Hester. That is your name, and you wrote it, and it is right. Read it again, Hester said. She read it again.